Welcome back to the channel, everybody. And yes, we are finally doing it. This is by far my most requested video on the channel. And we're going to talk about today is the real failures behind Operation Red Wings. Okay, this video is not going to be another drama pile-on theory craft video about the lone runner, the fastest runner, and all the controversy behind that. I'm going to give you guys a deep dive into the things that actually caused this mission to go wrong. Okay. And I'm just going to say up front, regardless of how you feel about this and all the controversy that's come from this over the years with the movie and the book and all this stuff, this was a terrible thing to have happen. Okay. We lost a lot of U.S. service members' lives on this mission, and we're going to be respectful about how we approach this. But the truth is the truth, and I'm going to give it to you. Okay. You are going to hear things in this video you've never heard before. You are going to hear stories in this video that you've never heard before that are true. And I'm going to do my best to, again, really unpack this for you guys to understand. And I mean in deep detail how these failures led to the ultimate catastrophe that happened on that day. Okay, so let's jump into it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Definitely helps the channel. Follow us on Patreon. Grab yourself some merch and let's do it. All right, so there's two main causes that led to the failures, right? There's a lot of controversy. Everybody wants to talk about what happened on that mountain, what shot down the helicopters, all these things. All of that is sort of irrelevant when we talk about what actually caused the failures, okay? Two main causes. The first one, and the biggest by far, it's not even close, is failure in communications, failure in radio communications. And there's a lot to deep dive on this, okay? The reason why I know so much about this is I was a Special Forces Communications Sergeant, did over 10 years in that MOS, and we used the lessons learned from this operation even in the Special Forces Qualification course when we learned how to do all our stuff in the radios. And yeah, there's a lot of really, really bad failures that I'm going to, again, explain to you in detail. Now, I'm going to use clips from the movie, even though I know the movie is ridiculous and it's not accurate at all in a lot of ways, but they do a good job of sort of showing some issues that happen with commo, okay? And again, we'll deep dive that. Number two is failures in leadership and planning and decision-making. All right, there was some huge mistakes made, and I'm going to tell you some stories from people I know personally that were there about how this all unfolded. Okay, so let's jump right into it. The way we're going to start this video, we're going to do this from a linear timeline. Okay, so I'm actually going to use the first part of the first communications window in the movie. Unfortunately, I can't show clips from this movie because it's heavily copyrighted. You can't even screen grab. They've been very, very serious about not letting anybody use this movie for anything. But I can use pictures and I can explain it. All right, so first thing we're going to do is really talk about, again, the radio and communication failures, break it down, and it's going to make sense. Okay, so let's jump into it. All right. Now, when we first see the team, and in the way the movie portrays it, right, they've infilled onto the mountain and they come into what's called a communication window. All right. So when we do communications in the military, we're going out on operations, we'll have set windows in time that we need to reach back, especially when you're doing recon or special reconnaissance. You need to reach back and make a comms check with the base. Okay, so that's what you see in this very first part of this movie. Okay, some real big things that are whoopsies here, okay, from the movie, but also when I'm going to tell you what actually happened to the team. Okay, so we first see Dietz, the communications operator, is going to make that first comms window back, right? When we see this picture here, we see this radio, okay, which is a Raytheon MB MMR. What this essentially is the upgraded version of what was called the PIS-5 radio, okay, the PSC-5. This is going to be very important, right? The way the movie portrays this, as you see, is that they are using a SATCOM antenna, okay, pointing it straight at the sky and not able to make comms very well. What we do know, and what I do know, and this is going to be something nobody's ever heard before, that PIS-5 radio, okay, so Dietz went in and talked to another group of special operators, not Navy SEALs. I'm not going to say who they are out of respect for them and the story, but he went in and asked them if they could help him program his PIS-5 radio because he didn't know how to do it. They had unfortunately moved on into this was 2005, moved on into a new radio system, the brand new radio system that got fielded, which is the 152 Alpha. The soft guys that he was talking to let him know they don't use the PIS-5 anymore, and apparently whether they didn't know how to actually program it or not, doesn't really matter. What he decided to do is told them, oh, well, I just won't take it with me then. Why is this a big deal? Okay, the PIS-5 radio is a large radio. It holds multiple batteries, and what it can do is produce radio waves at much higher wattage, okay, let's say 10 watts, which helps blast that signal out stronger. Okay, it's really, really important if you're in areas that have poor reception or different things like that. All right, so one, they didn't have that radio with them. Okay, why does that matter? Because they're most likely doing is carrying embedder radios, which are handheld radios that can do SATCOM, but again, can only push typically upwards of 5 watts, a lot less power. Okay, so potentially the reason why they're not making that comms window is because they're don't have a radio strong enough. The problem here is SATCOM guys, we're talking about the global war on terror, and this is gonna, I know you got to stay with me because we're deep diving. SATCOM and the global war on terror. The way it works is you're shooting your signal. I need to explain the differences between SATCOM and line of sight, okay? Because the movie really mixes these up back and forth a lot. What line of sight talk is my radio has a line of sight radio signal, travels horizontally across the ground or the earth until it hits that other radio and you make communications. So you have to have line of sight. That's why it's called line of sight, right? For you to be able to talk. SATCOM is not that. I have to shoot my signal at a satellite up in the atmosphere, above the atmosphere, and then it takes that signal, transmits it back down to the ground where I receive it. This is what they're doing, SATCOM. In the global war on terror in Afghanistan, we had dedicated satellites directly above our heads. Okay, so as you can see, he's pointed it up, he's shooting it up. I've never seen SATCOM, if programmed correctly, ever fail. And I'm pretty sure every radio operator that was in Afghanistan and Iraq is going to tell you the same thing. It's guaranteed. What we do know, there's two lines of thought here of why comms were never made. And you see in the movie, they sort of show like it's broken and unreadable. That's not a thing, okay? They never made comms. The reason, the two controversies here. One, the reason that they never made comms, and this is what we learned, is that they did not have crypto in their radio, okay? When you see this radio, what you see here on that PIS-5, it shows, you know, that crypto key slot 2, all right? That would assume that the radio is actually programmed with a cryptographic key. So think about a cryptographic key kind of like Bitcoin, all right? So it's a key that is programmed into the radio that you have to have that matching key to talk to each other, okay? That's the way SATCOM radios work. If you don't program that into your radio, you'll never be able to talk to whoever you're trying to talk to, okay? Which kind of makes sense for why they were never able to make comms via the radio. What I think really happened here is, because again, that's massive negligence. That's the assumption that this team, and again, this team that went out was extremely, extremely inexperienced. We'll talk about that in the second part of the video. Very, very inexperienced team. Were they so inexperienced and so negligent and so incompetent that they didn't even do a radio check? Okay, we do this every time we're going to step out on an operation. Here's a picture of me leading a radio check in Afghanistan. All right, this is what we do. Before we go out, everybody gets in a big circle. We all do comms checks, make sure we can talk to each other. Good to go. You're going to do your SATCOM checks, all your radio platforms. This would suggest that they did none of that. That is massively incompetent. However, there's a second line of thought, which I have sort of theory crafted myself based off of my time being a commo sergeant in Afghanistan in the Middle East. And what I think is more likely that happened, see, in the global war on terror and downrange, typically we have what's called comms, sort of comms windows that are weekly, the way the keys work. And each week, the keys switch over to a new key. So you're not using the same cryptographic key. The way we do this is if soldiers are killed, captured, and the devices we use to fill keys fall into the hands of the enemy, then they won't be able to actually use those for any longer than a week's time. So what I think has most likely happened, and you have to be very careful about this when you're going out, is they were most likely went out on a day when the key was still active. Let's say the key's still working until Friday. It rolls over Friday night at midnight. New key on midnight Saturday. That they probably did their comms checks before they went out on that Friday, and everything worked fine. They head outside the wire. Very experienced guys didn't realize the cryptographic keys were rolling. It's got a rollover, crypto rollover. rolling over that night, and then the next morning when they infill, try to make comms, they can't make comms. That makes a lot more sense to me, because the way we had to do it as the commo sergeant, you have to plan for this accordingly. So what you can do is you can coordinate with the jock, with the SOTF, with the aircrafts and everybody, and you can say, hey, we're going to stay on this week's crypto key for the entirety of the mission, no matter how long it lasts, right? So then everyone knows we're not rolling crypto over. If you don't tell them that, they're going to assume that they're going to roll crypto over, which I think is what happened here most likely, and why you see in this movie, and why we know about the story itself, that no comms were ever able to be made until the end with an Arabian sat phone, which we're going to get into that as well. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, what they're not doing is line of sight radio, which the movie portrays them trying to do later. Okay, SATCOM radio, it's the most guaranteed to work if it's programmed correctly with the right key. I've never seen it fail in 10 years as an 18 Echo, ever. It's the most reliable. So the odds that they couldn't get comms, SATCOM, is user error, 100%. They either didn't have crypto in the radios. Oh, last one, I forgot to even tell you, the movie, like, God bless the movie for trying, right? If you see here, it shows on that screen, it says Vincent, okay? Vincent is a VULOS key. VULOS is a line of sight cryptographic key, okay? I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. All right, so what VULOS means is very high frequency, ultra high frequency line of sight, okay? It's a radio wave, and that is sort of what the line of sight we use in our radios is, okay? Vincent is the type of key that goes with that. So that is not actually, let's say that was objectively correct in that movie, you wouldn't have been able to make comms because Vincent isn't the right key to have in your radio, okay? So it didn't have good enough military advisors on that movie. But again, it doesn't really matter. The reality is comms wasn't made. Okay, and that what becomes such a big deal with comms, as you see throughout that movie, then you get into what's called missed comms windows, right? When we have these PACE plans, a PACE plan is a commo plan that gives you your primary, your alternate, your contingency, and your emergency, right? You're going to have multiple radio systems, whether it be SATCOM, line of sight to a relay through a Predator drone back to base. Contingency could be an Iridium SATCOM phone, which you see in the movie. We'll talk about that in the middle. You're going to have a bunch of different types of communications, all right? And this is where another failures are, right? They weren't able to make comms over their SATCOM radio. Their alternate, and what it should have been, okay, which they didn't have, is that they didn't program, and now this is going to be controversy again, but they didn't program the frequencies to the CAS or the aircraft platforms that were overhead for a lot of this, because there was, into their radios. Why is that a problem? Well, when you can't make SATCOM, you go to your alternate. Their alternate would have been line of sight relay, okay, through that Predator drone or whatever's right overhead. The fact they didn't have those frequencies, they no longer could make line of sight, and that's a line of sight from line of sight to me to the aircraft, line of sight from the aircraft back to base. They would have not been able to make line of sight communications either. Okay, that's another massive failure. All of these are failures because had they just had comms, they could have reached back to base immediately, let them know they were compromised, and to drive up a plan to get them. Instead, they ended up getting exposed, compromised, and got in a big gunfight, ended up getting killed before anybody got there. Also, then we'll talk about the decision to go in with that helicopter, which gets shot down later at the end of the video. All right, second miscomms window. Okay, what you see here in this part of the movie, when they had they're making the decision on whether they're going to let the kid loose that compromised them or not, and team leader says, hey, we are going to climb to the top of this mountain, and then you are going to make comms once we get there. Okay, again, got to understand the difference between line of sight communications and SATCOM. And the reason why this is important, getting to high ground is very, very important for line of sight. Why? If you can get to the top of a mountain, okay, you're up here with your radio, that radio signal can travel really, really far with enough power output, right? And this is why wattage, when we talked about having a bigger radio, is more important earlier, can travel very, very far. So getting to that top of the mountain would be great for line of sight communications. We already know you've got a SATCOM radio, okay? All right, think about it this way, okay? The average satellite, whether it's in medium Earth orbit, MEO, or geostationary orbit, right, is anywhere from probably 18,000 to 35,000 kilometers up into the universe, right, outside the Earth. Kilometers, okay, tens of thousands away. So you getting 100 feet higher towards that satellite that is 15 to 35,000 kilometers away does nothing. Okay. So this is where the movie kind of botches it again, that they need to get to high ground to make my SATCOM shot. It makes no sense. Now, it could make sense if, so sometimes your takeoff angle of your satellite, right, if it's straight up, makes no difference. Some places that are really rural, that are away from a lot of satellites, Mongolia is a good example of this. You might have a takeoff angle where your satellite is like very, very low, because again, it's like across the world. That's not the case in the Middle East. We had dedicated satellites right above our heads, right? As you saw in that picture, he's shooting it straight up. So getting to the top of the mountain does absolutely nothing there. Okay, so that's just another botched thing by the movie that doesn't make any sense. But again, I mean, again, they didn't have any crypto in their radio, or the crypto was wrong anyway. Wouldn't have made a difference, right? So they're trying to get to the top of this mountain for no reason, without maybe realizing it. All right. So in the next one, right, we get to finally the decision is made after they've been in this huge gunfight to pull the Iridium SATCOM phone out. And this just, when I watched this movie as a communications sergeant, this just drove me crazy. If this actually happened, which it may have, but I want you to think about something. Okay, so this is something I carried, which is an Iridium sat phone. What it does is allows you to make a phone call to through a satellite, right? Not through, typical cell phone towers and things like that. The signal goes to a satellite, comes back down to the end station. Great for, doing SATCOM. You don't need to, again, get any higher because you're shooting it up in the air to the satellite. So they finally make the decision after they've already had somebody killed. They're pretty much overrun. And you see this decision made that he's going to climb out, the team leader's going to climb out to the very edge of this rock while he's under fire, and this great heroism to get signal on his Iridium phone to make that call. Okay. Biggest problems here is why, when you go through your PACE plan, okay, when you made that first comms window, you couldn't make comms on SATCOM. You couldn't make comms on line of sight because you didn't have the frequencies in your radio. Why didn't you pull your SATCOM phone out right then and call base? They didn't. They wait a day and a half, multiple missed comms windows to finally figure out they have the SATCOM phone that they can use. Okay. Now, again, none of us know what happened on that mountain, but according to the Navy, this is how they finally got in contact with him. It was an Iridium sat phone. Okay. So awesome scene where he climbs out and gives his life, and it's in his Medal of Honor citation that he did this. And again, I don't want to disparage it, but like, if that's true, there was no reason for him to do it. Or B, he could have just done it much earlier, and should have done it much earlier. Okay. So again, I don't want to disparage anything, but like, if the movie got that right, huge, just inexperience. Okay. No experienced combo guy would have ever had this coordination of events. And again, why this is so important is all this time, they're not able to communicate back to their base to start getting QRF actually spun up to get them out before they're compromised, right? Because if they weren't compromised, potentially those helicopters that eventually flew in and got shot down could have come in, right, without the Taliban being notified that there's a massive gunfight on the mountain and getting prepared for that, and could have gotten those guys out. But they didn't, because failures in planning for commo, and again, just massive inexperience, not bringing the right radios out, not having crypto, not programming aircraft frequencies. All of these things are just massive inexperience and ineptness, really. I mean, I will say, SEALs, as far as I know, they don't, for us as Green Berets, as a communications operator, I go through 4 months of school, huge portion of pipeline. Most, some of these soft schools aren't even that long, right? For the entire pipeline, we go through 4 months just for that, just to learn radios. I don't think the SEALs do that. I think it's kind of more of a side job that they may learn. Okay, so unfortunately, I think that was a lot of lessons learned for them there. All right, so I know that was long, but that was a real deep dive into failures in radio communications, guys. And I can tell you all of the things that happened in not just the movie, but the actual events following that, all of those were preventable by radio communications, all of it. And so, yes, at its core, that's the true failures, is all those things I talked about. Again, just leaving radios behind because you didn't know how to program. Again, I hate to disparage it, but that's the reality of what happened. Crypto not being in the radios, wrong frequencies, all these things. Again, and we're going to talk about the inexperience of this unit to begin with in this next section. Okay, in the next section, we're going to talk about failures in leadership and actual planning. Because yes, you may have heard this before, but I can verify through people I know personally who were there. The SEAL team there was told by multiple units not to go into that area and not to go in the mountain. And we're going to talk about that next and the decisions that were made after that essentially leadership got all these soldiers killed. Okay. All right. But before we do that, got to pay the bills, keep the lights on, give a shout out to our partners over at Barbell Apparel. Yes, it's summertime. And if you're like me, you're out at the range all the time, and Barbell Apparel's got amazing new tactical clothing. So let's check that out.
What's up, everybody? We're out here at the range doing some practice competition shooting, and I've got on Barbell Apparel's brand new tactical shorts. All right, so if you didn't know, Barbell doesn't just sell jeans and dress clothes, they also got badass tactical gear as well. Also, they got pants, different stuff, guys. These are durable. They're also some of the most comfortable shorts I've worn. I'm not a big shorts guy at the range, but guys, these have changed my entire perspective on wearing shorts at the range, running and gunning. All right, so if you're looking to get yourself a nice pair of Barbell shorts for the summer, head on over, grab some, and guys, you'll thank me later. All right, now we're gonna get to it.
All right, so next, let's talk about, again, failures in leadership, failures in planning. Okay, again, radio communication failures, core. Like, as much as people want to call the commo guy a nerd, everybody knows if you don't have comms, you're most likely going to get wiped out. Okay, that's the reality of it. But the decision to even go in to begin with was a massive failure as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about that next. Okay, the reality is the Peck River Valley was notorious at the time, notorious for being one of the most dangerous areas to go in. Okay, it was known as basically a hornet's nest, and all of the sort of special forces teams, even DevGru that was there at the time, all knew, like, you can't send 4 guys up on that mountain by themselves. Okay, they're going to get slaughtered, they're going to get compromised. That's the reality of it. And yes, this Navy SEAL team that came in, which was, again, very inexperienced. Okay, this isn't from me, this is from the Navy SEAL community and DevGru community that have all talked about this before. Yes, very inexperienced. Okay, and so they were told by an ODA, Special Forces ODA, that basically had run that area, because for us during that time early in the war, you know, we were doing VSO and living out in areas, and we knew a lot about the areas we're in, right? And the ODAs there told them, like, you cannot go up into that mountain by yourself with 4 people, and B, do not fly helicopters into that valley, right? They try to shoot us down every time we fly our helicopters in there. On top of that, it wasn't just Green Berets that were there. And again, I know someone who was in command there personally at the time, who I've heard this from as well. But I also know DevGru operator, who has also told me that DevGru was there and told that SEAL team the exact same thing. You cannot go onto that mountain with 4 people by yourself, and you cannot fly helicopters in there. From what I was told, the response was along the lines, to the Green Berets at least, of, we're Navy SEALs, we don't need your help, we don't need your advice. Okay, a lot of arrogance in that, which is not surprising for that unit. But that's the reality. That it wasn't like they got blindsided by this. It wasn't like we had no idea where we were going or what we were walking into. Again, there's been articles written about the Peck River Valley and how dangerous this place was. So everybody knew, and the decision was still made. We don't care. We're going to do what we want. And they decided to send those 4 troops up onto that mountain with, again, not having the correct radios, not having a comms plan intact. And again, that is just wild level failures from a leadership standpoint to have made that decision to do that and to let them go in. Okay. Next is going to be the decision to fly those helicopters in. There's a ton of controversy behind this between the SEALs, the 160th, what's true, what's not. And again, there was a lot of information that everybody had that knew you cannot just fly helicopters in the Peck River Valley. You hear a lot of different stories about this, right? Supposedly a helicopter was shot down by an RPG. I'll tell you this, and I'm just going to give my opinion. I don't know which of these is true. Again, there's been people involved that have said a bunch of different things. An RPG. The likelihood of a helicopter being shot down by an RPG, unless it's basically about to land, is extremely, extremely low. If a helicopter is at 10,000 feet elevation flying in, you're not shooting it down with an RPG. That's not a thing. SA-6, anti-aircraft device. Okay, so it's a guided munition, much like an RPG, that's actually going to track down a target and hit it. This is supposedly the real thing that was used, which would make sense to take down that helicopter. However, there's the third take that I've heard, and that is that the helicopter was not shot down at all, that it basically hit a tree on landing, and the helicopter basically crashed on its own, and that ended the lives of all those SEALs inside. So the problem here and the controversy here is, which story do we want to tell? Because we do know as the story went on, it was turned into a movie, it was turned into a book, everything, tons of stuff was fabricated in it to turn this giant failure. And again, it's all failures, guys. It sucks to say, but all of these SEALs lost their lives due to man-made failures, not due to random chance, not due to anything like that. It was all due to man-made failures. So, like I said, we've fabricated a lot of things to turn this massive botched mission into a story of heroism. And yes, there's a lot of heroism in this story on that mountain, and those SEALs that went in to get those guys out. But the reality is, what's true? I don't know. I'll say just making the decision to fly in there to begin with, horrible decision. And then if that helicopter just landed and killed those guys, I mean, that's a bad look for the pilots. What's a better story to tell? I don't really know. I personally don't have any better information on that. Okay. My core knowledge comes from, again, the failures in the communications, failures in radio operations, the failures in leadership, the failures in planning, and all of those things accumulatively unfortunately led to the loss of the lives of all those Navy SEALs and soldiers and 160th crew. So yeah, guys, this one's gone a little bit longer than I was expecting. I was expecting it to be about half this long. But again, we're not getting into the drama or anything like that. I think that's, what happened on that mountain, supposedly, other than, supposedly there's ISR footage of it. There's only one person out there that knows the truth about that for the most part, is what it is. But as for all of the things that went into causing that operation to fail, now you guys, I hope understand that a little bit better. If you watch the movie back again, I can tell you, you're going to see those scenes of those radio communications and learning what you've learned now. You're going to go, oh, okay, I see how silly this movie actually is. Okay. None of it actually makes any real sense. Okay. So, that's going to do it for this one. Again, it went a little bit long. Hope you guys found this one interesting. I finally got around to it. And let me know what you think in the comments section. Hopefully this adds to the discussion about this long term. I haven't really seen anybody talk about this side of things. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one. And I will catch y'all in the next one.